The airport was quieter than I expected for a Monday morning. Not silent, just muted, like the world had turned the volume down to make room for thoughts no one wanted. I held my son Noah's small hand as we rolled our carry-on across the polished floor, the wheels clicking in a steady rhythm that grounded me more than I realized. Noah was half awake, his hoodie zipped up to his chin, his head leaning against my arm. We were supposed to be flying to see my parents for a week. A simple trip. A reset. That's what I had told myself while packing the night before, folding his clothes with careful precision, pretending the distance between my husband and me hadn't grown wide enough to echo. Daniel hadn't replied to my last message. We're at the airport. Gate 32. I told myself he was busy. He always was. The departures hall smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Screens flickered overhead, flights scrolling by like lives moving forward, whether you were ready or not. I checked my phone again, more out of habit than hope, and slipped it back into my bag when nothing had changed. That was when Noah stopped walking. "Mom," he said softly. I followed his gaze. At first I only saw a familiar silhouette, broad shoulders, tailored coat, the posture of a man who always knew where he was going. My chest tightened before my mind caught up. Daniel stood near the international check-in counters. For half a second, just half, I felt relief. Maybe he'd come to see us off. Maybe the silence had meant nothing. Maybe I had been wrong about all the things I'd been quietly afraid to name. Then I noticed the woman beside him. She wasn't touching him. Not obviously. She stood close enough that their sleeves brushed, close enough to belong in his personal space. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting toward him in a way that felt practiced, intimate. Daniel smiled back. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. My breath caught, sharp and sudden, as if the air itself had turned against me. Around us, people hurried past with passports and purpose, unaware that my life had just cracked open in the middle of an airport terminal. Noah's fingers tightened around mine. "Mom," he whispered again, confused but calm. "Is Daddy leaving too?" For a few heartbeats, I didn't move. I stood there with Noah's hand locked in mine, my body frozen while my mind scrambled to protect me from what my eyes were already accepting. Daniel was really there. Not a trick of light. Not someone who merely looked like him. And for one fragile, foolish second, hope rose anyway. Maybe the woman beside him was a coworker. Maybe this was one of those rushed business trips he never explained well. Maybe he'd planned to surprise us, to walk over any moment and kiss Noah's forehead like he used to. I clung to that thought, the way people cling to wreckage in deep water, knowing it wouldn't save them, but unable to let go. Then Daniel turned slightly, not toward me, toward her. He leaned in just enough to hear her over the noise of the terminal. She said something I couldn't hear, and he laughed under his breath. Not politely, not out of habit. It was soft and genuine, the kind of laugh that comes from ease, from comfort, from intimacy. My stomach dropped. This wasn't accidental closeness. This wasn't coincidence. The space between them wasn't the space of strangers or colleagues. It was practiced, familiar, earned over time I had not been a part of. Noah shifted beside me. "Mom," he asked quietly, "why isn't Daddy waving?" I swallowed hard. My mouth opened, but no words came. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking something important. Daniel reached for the handle of a suitcase that wasn't his usual black one. It was smaller, lighter, and unmistakably hers. Their fingers brushed, then lingered for a fraction of a second too long to be innocent. That was when it hit me, not as panic, but as clarity. He hadn't come to see us off. He was leaving, with her. The airport suddenly felt too bright, too open. Every announcement over the loudspeaker scraped against my nerves. Every passing face felt intrusive, as if the entire terminal had front-row seats to a truth I had spent months avoiding. I should have turned away. I should have spared Noah this sight. But my feet refused to move, anchored by a mix of disbelief and a need, almost desperate, to see how far Daniel would go without looking back. And then he did look back. His eyes landed on us, and the color drained from his face. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. The woman beside him followed his gaze, her expression shifting from curiosity to calculation in seconds. Her eyes moved over me, then Noah, assessing, measuring, deciding. Daniel straightened, his jaw tightening as if preparing for impact. I felt Noah's grip tighten again. In that moment, I understood something with terrifying certainty. Whatever happened next would change all of us forever. I noticed her fully only after Daniel froze. Until then, she had been a blur at his side, an outline, a presence my mind resisted giving shape to. But once Daniel's body stiffened and his breath caught, my attention shifted to her with a sharp, unwilling focus. She was younger than me, not dramatically, but enough that it showed in the way she carried herself. Confident posture, relaxed smile. The kind of ease that comes from believing the world is still generous. Her coat was tailored, her hair smooth and glossy, falling perfectly into place, as if she'd checked her reflection more than once before stepping into the terminal. She followed Daniel's stare and found me. Her eyes moved quickly, over my face, my clothes, the hand I held tightly around my son's. There was no shock in her expression, no embarrassment. Only a brief pause, then understanding, and then something else. Recognition. Not of me, but of the situation. As if she had imagined this moment before and decided, in advance, how she would stand inside it. She didn't step away from Daniel. She didn't look uncomfortable. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly closer to him, her shoulder brushing his arm again. Subtle but deliberate. A silent claim. Daniel finally spoke, though I couldn't hear the words from where I stood. His lips moved too fast, his head tilting toward her as if explaining, justifying. She listened with her head angled, eyes still on me. Her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't cruelty, was confidence. Noah tugged on my hand. "Mom," he whispered. "Who is she?" The question landed heavier than anything else that morning. I knelt beside him, my knees weak. My heart pounding so loudly I was afraid he could hear it. I searched for language that wouldn't scar him, for a truth gentle enough to hold. "She's someone Daddy knows," I said carefully. The woman watched this exchange with open curiosity. Not guilt, not shame. She was studying me, measuring how I might react, whether I would cry, shout, cause the scene she might have prepared herself for. I didn't give her any of it. I stood back up slowly, smoothing Noah's hair, forcing my breathing to steady. I met her gaze directly for the first time. Up close, I saw it clearly then. She thought she had won something. Not Daniel exactly, but the position beside him, the role, the illusion of being chosen. She didn't know she was standing in the middle of a story that would cost her more than she imagined. And neither of us knew yet that this was only the beginning. Daniel was the first one to break the silence. He didn't rush toward us. He didn't apologize. He didn't even ask how Noah was. Instead, he took a slow step forward, as if approaching a negotiation rather than his own family. His shoulders squared, his face settling into that familiar expression he used in meetings, the one meant to project control. "Elena," he said, keeping his voice low, calm, careful. "Can we talk somewhere else? Somewhere else. Not, I'm sorry. Not, this isn't what it looks like, not even. We need to talk, just relocation, damage control. I realized then that he wasn't panicking because he had hurt me. He was panicking because he had been seen. People passed between us, dragging luggage, laughing, checking their watches. The normalcy of it all felt cruel. Daniel glanced around, his jaw tightening as he noticed how public this was becoming. "This isn't the place," he added, his tone sharpening slightly. "Let's not do this here. Do this, as if I were the one causing a problem." Noah shifted closer to me, his body instinctively seeking shelter. I felt his small fingers press into my palm, grounding me in a way Daniel never could. "You didn't tell me you were traveling today," I said evenly. I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "With her?" Daniel exhaled through his nose, irritation flashing across his face before he masked it. "It's complicated." That was his second mistake. Complicated was what people said when the truth didn't favor them. He glanced back at the woman. Madison, I would later learn. Then back at me, lowering his voice further. "We'll talk later. I don't want Noah hearing things he doesn't need to hear." Something inside me went cold. He was already framing this as my potential failure, as my emotional instability, as something I might mishandle. "I think Noah already knows enough," I replied. Daniel's eyes flicked down to his son for the first time. "Hey, buddy," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You okay?" Noah didn't answer. He just looked at his father with an expression too old for his age. Quiet, observant, disappointed. Madison shifted beside Daniel, clearly uncomfortable now, though she tried to hide it. The situation was no longer neat, no longer controllable. Daniel straightened again, his voice firmer. "We'll discuss this privately. I'll call you." He said it like a conclusion, like a decision already made. And in that moment, I understood exactly who Daniel was when things didn't go his way. A man who believed calmness was authority. A man who thought silence meant victory. A man who had no idea how much he was about to lose. Daniel's forced smile lingered in the air, thin and fragile, like glass stretched too far. He waited for Noah to respond, perhaps expecting a nod, a word, anything that would allow him to pretend this moment could still be managed. Noah said nothing. Instead, he looked up at his father with steady eyes, the kind that weren't searching for reassurance anymore. I felt his hand loosen from mine as he took a small step forward, no longer hiding behind me. "Dad," he said quietly. Daniel's shoulders relaxed just a little, as if relieved. "Yeah, buddy?" Noah hesitated. I could see the thoughts lining up behind his eyes, slow and careful. He wasn't confused. He wasn't angry. He was trying to understand something adults had failed to explain. "Are you going on a trip with her?" he asked, nodding toward Madison. "Because you don't want to come home with us anymore?" The words were simple. There was no accusation in them, no raised voice, just a child's honest attempt to place the pieces where they belonged. The effect was immediate. Daniel's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed again. Whatever answer he had prepared for me, whatever version of the truth he thought he could sell, collapsed under the weight of that question. Madison stiffened. For the first time, her confidence cracked. She looked at Daniel, waiting for him to fix it, to explain, to protect the image she had stepped into. He didn't. People nearby slowed, some pretending not to listen while clearly doing exactly that. The airport noise seemed to fade, replaced by the quiet pressure of attention. "That's not," Daniel started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." Noah frowned slightly. "But it feels simple." I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to pull Noah back, to shield him from the silence that followed, from the truth Daniel was too cowardly to say out loud. But something told me to stay still, to let this moment exist. Daniel knelt down, his movements awkward now, uncertain. "Buddy, grown-up things can be confusing," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Sometimes people make mistakes." Noah tilted his head. "Then why do you look scared, Dad?" That did it. Daniel froze, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. He looked exactly like what he was. A man cornered not by anger or confrontation, but by a child who saw through him without effort. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. This wasn't the moment for my pain. This was the moment his son saw who he really was. And Daniel knew it too, because as he looked up at me, shame finally replaced fear in his eyes. And for the first time that morning, he understood something irreversible. No matter how he explained this later, no matter how carefully he rewrote the story, the truth had already been spoken. And it hadn't come from me. Daniel rose slowly from his crouch, his face tightening as if he were bracing himself against an invisible blow. The shame Noah had uncovered lasted only a moment before something colder replaced it. I recognized that look. I had seen it before, in arguments late at night when he realized he couldn't win by explaining. So he changed tactics. "Okay," he said quietly, straightening his jacket. His voice dropped into that calm, measured tone he used with clients. "That's enough for now." Enough. Not, "I'm sorry you heard that." Not, "I shouldn't have put you in this position." Just enough. He glanced around again, clearly aware of the eyes and ears nearby. Then he leaned toward me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You don't need to make this worse," he said. "Let's talk about this later, like adults." Something in me flinched, because I understood what he was doing. He wasn't speaking to me as a partner. He was positioning me as a risk, as a problem to be managed before I embarrassed him further. "No one is making anything worse," I replied, just as quietly. "This is already happening." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're emotional," he said, barely moving his lips, "and Noah doesn't need to be in the middle of it." The words landed exactly where he intended. "You're emotional. You're unstable. You're the danger here." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, anger mixing with disbelief. For years I had softened myself to keep the peace. I had swallowed frustration, delayed conversations, convinced myself that patience was strength. And now, standing in the middle of an airport with Arsen between us, he was trying to rewrite the scene so that I was the one out of control. Noah pressed closer to my side again, his small body reacting before his mind could fully process the shift. He didn't look at Daniel anymore. He looked at me. Madison shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the change in energy. This wasn't the clean break she had imagined. This was messy, public, human. "Daniel," I said, meeting his eyes steadily, "you don't get to decide how this looks." His expression hardened. "I'm trying to protect everyone." That was his biggest lie yet. He wasn't protecting Noah. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting himself. A man who believed that if he stayed calm enough, quiet enough, reasonable enough, the truth would bend around him. I realized then that this moment wasn't just about betrayal. It was about control. And for the first time, I understood something that made my hand stop shaking. If I stayed silent now, he would use that silence against me later. And whatever happened next, I couldn't let that happen. Not for me, and not for my son. Madison was the first one to recover. While Daniel and I stood locked in a quiet standoff, she adjusted her posture as if reminding herself where she belonged. Her shoulders rolled back, her chin lifted slightly, and she smoothed an invisible crease in her coat. It was a small movement, almost graceful, but it carried a message louder than words. She wasn't leaving. Her eyes met mine again, openly this time. Not challenging, not apologetic. curious, studying, as if she were watching a performance and deciding whether it was going according to plan. Then she smiled. It wasn't wide or mocking. It was subtle, restrained, an expression practiced enough to pass as polite if anyone asked. But there was something underneath it that made my stomach tighten. Certainty. She believed this moment belonged to her. "Daniel," she said softly, touching his arm at last. "We're going to miss boarding if we don't move." The contact was deliberate, casual, familiar. She said it like a reminder, not a request. Daniel hesitated, just for a second. His eyes flicked to Noah, then back to Madison's hand on his sleeve. I watched the calculation happen in real time, the weighing of consequences, the instinctive choice of the path that required the least immediate discomfort. He didn't remove her hand. Instead, he nodded. "Give me a minute." Madison stepped back half a pace, but her smile lingered as she turned away, already confident in the outcome, as if she knew he would follow. I realized then that she wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid of me or the situation. She had already decided how this story would end. In her version, Daniel would calm me down. He would explain things away. He would leave with her. And I would eventually fade into the background, emotional, inconvenient, manageable. She thought she was the reward at the end of a difficult conversation. Noah leaned closer to me, his voice barely audible. "She looks happy," he said. I swallowed. "Sometimes people smile when they think they're right," I answered carefully. Daniel turned back to me, urgency creeping into his tone. "We'll talk tonight," he said. "I promise. Just take Noah and go. Please." Please. The word sounded hollow now. I looked past him, at Madison waiting a few steps away, scrolling casually on her phone, as if nothing significant were happening, as if she hadn't just stepped into the center of a family's collapse. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not jealousy, clarity. Madison believed she had won because Daniel had chosen her in public. Because he hadn't denied her. Because he was about to walk away without looking back. What she didn't understand, what neither of them understood yet, was that this wasn't a victory. It was a mistake. One that would follow them both far longer than either of them expected. I didn't argue with him. That seemed to surprise Daniel more than anything else. He was braced for resistance, for tears, raised voices, questions he didn't want to answer. He had rehearsed calm responses, practiced patience. What he hadn't prepared for was my silence. I looked at him one last time, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling. Detachment. "Okay," I said simply. The word landed between us, flat and final. Daniel blinked, clearly unsure if he had heard me correctly. "That's it?" he asked. I nodded. That's it. No accusations. No ultimatums. I didn't need them. The truth was already standing between us, breathing, undeniable. I turned to Noah and crouched down, bringing myself to his level. His eyes searched my face, looking for signs of panic, confusion, or fear. I gave him none of those. "Hey," I said softly, brushing his hair back. "We're still catching our flight." "Without Daddy?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Just us." He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." That quiet acceptance broke something open in my chest. I stood and reached for our suitcase, the handle cool beneath my fingers. The simple weight of it felt grounding. Real. I took Noah's hand again and turned away from Daniel without another word. Behind us, I heard him exhale sharply. "Elena!" I didn't stop. Each step away from him felt unreal. As if I were walking out of a room I had lived in for years, without knowing where the door was. The sounds of the terminal grew louder again. Announcements, laughter, rolling luggage, life rushing back in around us. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I might see hesitation, or regret, or fear. And none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the way Noah's hand fit perfectly in mine, the way his steps matched mine without question, the way he trusted me completely in a moment when everything else had shifted. As we walked, my phone vibrated in my bag. I didn't check it. Not yet. Daniel could wait. The explanations could wait. The justifications, the apologies he might eventually offer. All of it could wait. Because in that moment, walking away through the crowd with my son beside me, I understood something with surprising clarity. Leaving wasn't weakness. It was the first decision I had made entirely for myself in a very long time. And even though I didn't know what the next hour, the next day, or the next year would bring, I knew this much for certain. Whatever happened after this would no longer be on his terms. The hotel room was quiet in the way unfamiliar places always are. Too quiet, like the walls were listening. Noah fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the morning, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I watched him for a long moment before turning off the bedside lamp, memorizing the calm on his face, as if I could store it away for later. Only then did I let myself sit on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. I reached for my phone, finally ready to see what I had avoided all afternoon. 3 missed calls, 2 messages from Daniel. I didn't open them, not yet. Instead, I opened our banking app, intending only to check our balance. Something ordinary, grounding. The screen loaded. Then it refreshed, and my stomach dropped. The joint account was nearly empty, not overdrawn, not frozen, just drained. Large transfers dated weeks back, amounts moved carefully, methodically. Rent, savings, the emergency fund we had promised never to touch. Gone. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened so hard it felt physical, like a hand pressing inward. I refreshed the screen again, as if the numbers might correct themselves. They didn't. This wasn't panic spending. This wasn't an accident. This was preparation. I scrolled through the transaction history with numb fingers, each line confirming what I hadn't wanted to believe. Daniel hadn't just planned a trip. He had planned an exit. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email. We should talk about arrangements, custody, finances. I don't want this to get messy. I stared at the words, my vision blurring. Arrangements. As if our life together were a calendar conflict. As if he hadn't already made sure I would land on my feet with nothing underneath me. I looked around the room, the neutral walls, the unfamiliar furniture, the suitcase still half unpacked. For the first time that day, fear crept in quietly, wrapping itself around my ribs. I had no backup plan, no lawyer, no separate savings, just a sleeping child and a truth that was sharper than anything I had faced before. I sat there until my legs went numb, replaying the morning in my head. The airport, his calm voice. The way he had asked me not to make this worse. Now I understood what he meant. He hadn't expected me to find out this fast. I lay down beside Noah, careful not to wake him, and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. Somewhere beneath the shock and fear, a new emotion began to surface. Slow, unfamiliar, and dangerous to someone like Daniel. Resolve. Because if he thought taking everything would leave me powerless, he had underestimated the one thing he had never managed to control. What I would do when I had nothing left to lose. Morning came too quickly. Noah woke up asking for cereal and cartoons, unaware that the ground beneath our lives had shifted overnight. I smiled for him, poured juice, tied his shoes with steady hands I didn't feel. I waited until he was distracted with his tablet before opening my laptop at the small desk by the window. Daniel had sent another email. The subject line was polite, neutral, almost professional. 2 steps. My pulse thudded in my ears as I opened it. He wrote about logistics, about schedules, about what would be best for Noah. He mentioned his demanding job, my flexible work, and the importance of stability. Then came the sentence that made my hands go cold. Given how emotional you were yesterday, I think it might be wise to keep conversations documented. Documented. As if I were a liability. As if he were already building a case. I scrolled down, my jaw tightening with every line. He proposed temporary custody, until things settle. He suggested I move out of the apartment permanently. He framed it all as concern, as reason, as responsibility. Not once did he mention the money. Not once did he acknowledge what he had taken. This wasn't damage control anymore. This was strategy. I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection staring back at me from the dark screen. For years, I had told myself Daniel was simply avoidant, not cruel. Conflict-averse, not calculating. I had been wrong. The knock on the door made me jump. I checked the peephole, my heart racing, then relaxed when I saw housekeeping. I declined politely and locked the door again, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I felt in an unfamiliar place. Noah looked up from his tablet. "Mom, are we okay?" I crossed the room and sat beside him, pulling him close. "We're okay," I said, choosing the words carefully. "Things are changing, but I've got you." He nodded, trusting me without hesitation. That trust felt heavier than fear. I opened my laptop again, not to respond to Daniel, but to search. Family law, custody rights, financial separation. Each new page felt like stepping into a world I had never wanted to learn, but now had no choice but to understand. By the time Noah finished breakfast, something inside me had settled. Daniel thought he had the upper hand because he had money, confidence, and a head start. He thought calm emails and careful wording could rewrite the truth. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see yet, was that by turning this into a calculation, he had made his biggest mistake. Because I was done trying to preserve the image of a marriage that no longer existed. And if he wanted this to be documented, measured, and decided on paper, then I would meet him there. Fully awake, fully present, and no longer afraid. Noah didn't say anything for most of the morning. That worried me more than tears would have. He sat quietly at the small table by the window, lining up his toy cars with unusual care, as if order itself might keep the world from shifting again. I watched him while pretending to check emails, my attention split between the screen and the subtle changes in his movements. He was thinking. Children always are, even when adults assume they aren't. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost casual. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart." He didn't look up right away. He pushed one car forward, then stopped. "Did I make Daddy sad yesterday?" The question hit me harder than Daniel's email ever could. I closed my laptop and moved closer, sitting across from him. "Why would you think that?" Noah shrugged. He looked different. Like when I break something and don't know how to fix it. My throat tightened. I reached for his hands, warm and small in mine. "You didn't make anyone sad?" I said gently. "You asked a question. That's not a bad thing." He nodded, absorbing that, but his brow stayed furrowed. He didn't answer me. I took a slow breath. "Sometimes adults don't answer because the answer is hard," I said. "Not because you shouldn't have asked." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at me, his eyes steady and serious, in a way that didn't match his age. "No one ever asks how you feel, Mom." The words knocked the air out of me. I stared at him, stunned, not by what he said, but by how clearly he saw. how he had noticed the silence around me long before I had named it myself. "I see it," he continued, his voice calm. "Daddy talks a lot. You listen a lot. But nobody asks you." Something inside my chest cracked open. I pulled him into my arms, holding him tighter than I meant to, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. Tears slipped free before I could stop them, falling silently against his shoulder. "I'm okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing him or myself. "But thank you for seeing me." He hugged me back, small arms fierce and certain. "I always see you." In that moment, I understood something profound and terrifying all at once. Daniel hadn't just underestimated me. He had underestimated our son. Because whatever battles lay ahead, emails, courtrooms, negotiations, there was one truth no strategy could undo. The most honest witness to our marriage had already spoken, and he was on my side. I met Rachel Whitmore by accident. At least, that's what it felt like at first. Noah was in school for the morning, and I had wandered into a quiet cafe a few blocks away, the kind with soft music and people who stayed long enough to finish entire chapters of their lives. I ordered coffee I barely tasted and opened my laptop, pretending to work while my thoughts ran in circles. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said gently. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up. She was in her mid-40s, composed in a way that came from experience rather than effort. Nothing flashy. Calm eyes, the kind of presence that made you feel observed without being judged. "No," I said. "Go ahead." She smiled and sat, setting down a folder that looked heavier than it appeared. We exchanged a few polite words. The weather, the neighborhood, nothing personal. I would have forgotten her entirely if not for what happened next. She glanced at my screen as I closed an email and paused. "Daniel Carter?" she asked carefully. My spine stiffened. "Yes. How do you know that name?" She studied my face for a moment, then sighed softly. I was hoping I was wrong. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. "Wrong about what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she introduced herself. "I'm Rachel Whitmore. Family law." That explained the folder. "And?" I pressed. Rachel leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. "I used to represent his former employer, and," she added, choosing her words with precision, "I was married to his boss." The room seemed to tilt. "I've seen this before," she continued. "The emails, the calm tone, the sudden concern about custody. The quiet financial shifts that leave the other person scrambling." My heart pounded. "You're saying he's done this before?" She nodded once. "Not exactly like this, but close enough that I recognized the pattern the moment I heard his name. I should have felt angry, vindicated, overwhelmed. Instead, I felt something else. Relief. Not because my situation was less painful, but because for the first time since the airport, I wasn't alone in seeing the truth. Rachel slid her card across the table. "I'm not here to push you into anything," she said. "But I don't believe in coincidence, and I don't believe you deserve to be blindsided." I stared at the card, then back at her. "What do you think I should do?" She met my gaze steadily. "I think you should stop reacting. And start preparing." As I wrapped my fingers around that small rectangle of paper, I realized something quietly powerful. Daniel had planned for my fear. He hadn't planned for someone who already knew how his story ended. Rachel didn't rush me. That was the first thing I noticed as we sat there, the cafe noise humming softly around us. She let the silence stretch, giving me space to breathe, to think, to decide whether I wanted the truth or just comfort. "I'm not asking you to trust me," she said finally. "I'm asking you to listen." I nodded. She opened the folder she had brought and slid a few pages toward me. Not documents, not evidence, but notes, timelines, names, arrows drawn in the margins. "This is how it usually starts," she said, tapping the first page. "Emotional distance, late work nights, trips that don't quite add up. Then comes the exit strategy." My stomach tightened. "Money gets moved quietly," she continued, "not all at once, just enough that when you notice, it's already too late to stop it. Then the tone changes. Emails become calm, polite, almost kind." I thought of Daniel's message. Next steps. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. "And custody?" I asked. Rachel's expression hardened. "That's the leverage. He frames concern as responsibility. He highlights your flexibility, your emotions, your lack of structure. He makes himself look like the stable option." I swallowed. "Did it work? Before?" She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. "At first." The words settled heavy between us. "My marriage ended differently," she added. "But I watched him advise, influence, guide. I watched women doubt themselves while he stayed calm and reasonable. By the time they realized what was happening, they were already defending instead of deciding." Something sharp and clear cut through my fear. "He thinks I'll panic," I said quietly. Rachel nodded. "He's counting on it." I stared down at the notes again, seeing my own life mapped out in someone else's handwriting. It was unsettling and empowering. "Madison," I said suddenly. "Does she know?" Rachel gave a small, almost sad smile. "She knows what he's told her, that you're unstable, that you'll calm down, that this will pass." My chest tightened, not with jealousy but with understanding. "She thinks she's different," I said. "They always do," Rachel replied. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces finally fitting together. The airport, the silence, the drained account. The carefully worded emails. Daniel hadn't reacted to being caught. He had followed a script, and the most dangerous part wasn't that he thought he was smarter than me. It was that he believed I would never see the pattern until it was too late. I met Rachel's gaze. "So what happens when someone does see it?" She closed the folder slowly. "Then the story changes." For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something solid beneath my fear. Not hope, preparation. I didn't confront Daniel after meeting Rachel. That was the first move he never saw coming. Instead of replying to his emails with emotion or outrage, I did something far more dangerous to someone like him. I went quiet, but not absent. I acknowledged messages briefly. Neutral, cooperative, reasonable, exactly the version of me he expected to control. While he relaxed, I worked. Rachel helped me open a new account in my name only. I rerouted my freelance income, small but steady, and documented every transfer Daniel had made from our joint funds. Dates, amounts, patterns. I didn't accuse him. I collected him. At night, after Noah fell asleep, I sat at the desk with my laptop and a cup of lukewarm tea, reading about custody law, financial disclosure, mediation strategy. I learned how language worked in court, how calm emails could still be evidence, how silence, when used correctly, could be power. Daniel sent another message. "I think we're handling this well. Let's keep things amicable." I almost laughed. He thought my lack of reaction meant surrender. He thought my politeness meant confusion. He mistook my restraint for weakness because that was how he had always understood me. Rachel warned me not to rush. "People like Daniel make mistakes when they believe they're winning," she said. "Let him feel safe." So I did. I agreed to a preliminary mediation date. I didn't mention the missing money. I didn't challenge his version of events. I let him talk about structure, stability, and responsibility, knowing every word was being recorded. Meanwhile, Rachel requested financial disclosures through the proper channels. Quietly. Formally. Unavoidable. When the documents came in, the picture was clear. Daniel hadn't just moved money. He had concealed it. Multiple accounts. Delayed reporting. Assets shifted under the assumption that I wouldn't notice until it was too late to matter. Rachel looked at me across her desk. "This changes things." I nodded. "I know." What Daniel didn't understand was this. I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't chasing revenge or public validation. I was building a foundation he couldn't shake. Every time he wrote another calm, carefully worded email, he added to the record. Every time he framed me as emotional while remaining composed himself, he revealed his strategy. And slowly, without raising my voice or making a single accusation, I stepped out of the role he had written for me. By the time he realized I wasn't reacting anymore, but responding with intent, it was already too late. Because this time, I wasn't playing defense. I was deciding the ending. Madison called me 3 days later. I didn't recognize the number at first. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another unknown caller or a delayed response from work. Something made me answer anyway. "Hi," she said, her voice too bright, too careful. "This is Madison. Daniel's friend." Friend. I closed my eyes briefly. "Yes?" There was a pause, the kind that carried nerves underneath it. "I just wanted to clear the air," she continued. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Daniel's under a lot of pressure right now." I listened without interrupting. She spoke quickly, as if afraid I might hang up. She talked about timing, about confusion, about how relationships were complicated and no one planned to hurt anyone. The words were polished, familiar. PR language meant to soften edges without admitting fault. Then her tone shifted. "He hasn't been answering my calls," she said, irritation slipping through the calm. "And he said it's better if we take some space. For now." There it was, the truth she hadn't been prepared for. Daniel hadn't chosen her. He had used her as a bridge, something temporary to step on while crossing from one life to another. And now that the crossing was no longer clean, he was cutting weight. "I see," I said evenly. Madison exhaled sharply. "I just think it's unfair. He made promises." I almost laughed, but stopped myself. Instead, I asked gently, "Did he put any of those promises in writing?" Silence. That was answer enough. She filled the quiet with justification. "He said you were unstable. That custody might be an issue, that he needed to protect himself." I felt no anger, only clarity. "He says that to everyone," I replied, "especially when he needs them to believe him." Her breathing changed, slower now, uneasy. "What are you saying?" she asked. I chose my words carefully. "I'm saying that if he wanted to be with you, he would be, publicly, clearly, without hesitation." Another pause, longer this time. "And he isn't," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "He isn't." The call ended soon after. No confrontation, no apology. Just the sound of someone finally understanding the role they had been cast in. Later that evening, Rachel forwarded me an update. Daniel had withdrawn a joint appearance, requested delays, changed counsel. He was scrambling. Madison had believed she was the future, the upgrade, the reward. What she didn't realize was that Daniel never replaced people with better. He replaced them with easier. And the moment things became difficult, he did what he always did. He walked away, alone. Daniel's unraveling didn't happen all at once. It started quietly, the way his betrayals always had, behind closed doors, in emails he thought no one else would read, in decisions he assumed would never be questioned. But this time, the silence didn't protect him. It exposed him. Rachel called me on a Thursday afternoon. "His disclosures don't match," she said simply. And the court noticed. I sat at my desk, staring out the window as traffic moved below, life continuing without any regard for the man who had once controlled my days. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means his credibility is gone," she replied. "And once that happens, everything else follows." Daniel missed a deadline for revised financial statements, then another. His attorney requested extensions that were granted once, then denied. Each delay raised more questions. Each question tightened the net. At mediation, he arrived late and left early. His calm demeanor cracked by irritation he could no longer hide. The man who had once spoken about stability and structure now struggled to explain basic inconsistencies. His voice rose. His patience thinned. That was when the mediator stopped him. "Mr. Carter," she said evenly, "this process relies on transparency." Transparency. The word hung in the room like an accusation. Weeks later, the ruling came. Full financial disclosure. Immediate reimbursement of misappropriated funds. Temporary primary custody granted to me, with supervised visitation until further review. Not because I asked for punishment, but because the facts demanded protection. Daniel appealed, quietly, desperately, and lost. The professional consequences followed quickly. His company placed him on administrative leave pending internal review. His name disappeared from the leadership page on their website. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. I didn't celebrate. I watched from a distance as the world he had built on image and control collapsed under the weight of his own decisions. He had believed consequences were for people who lost control. He had never imagined they would come for him while he stayed calm. The final message from him arrived late one night. I never thought it would go this far. I read it once, then closed my phone. It had always been this far. He just hadn't noticed, because until now, he'd never been the one paying the price. As I tucked Noah into bed that night, he looked up at me sleepily. "Are we safe now?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "We are." And for the first time since the airport, I knew it was true. Daniel had lost the one thing he valued above everything else, control. And there was no appeal for that. The apartment was smaller than the one we'd left behind. The windows didn't frame a skyline, and the floors creaked when you walked too fast. But it was clean, bright in the mornings, and close to Noah's school. When we moved in, we had only what fit in the back of a rented car, and a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Peace, it turned out, didn't need much space. Our days found a new rhythm. Mornings were unhurried. I made coffee while Noah ate cereal at the counter, telling me about dreams that still made no sense, and math problems he already did in his head. I worked from the small desk by the window, my laptop humming softly as sunlight shifted across the walls. No one rushed me. No one questioned my tone. No one rewrote my reality. At night, after Noah fell asleep, I sat on the couch with a book I could finally finish, listening to the quiet without waiting for it to break. I didn't miss the old apartment. I didn't miss the tension disguised as normalcy. I didn't miss the way I had learned to measure my words before speaking. Freedom felt quieter than I expected. Rachel checked in occasionally, more as a friend than an attorney now. "You're doing well," she told me once. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. Daniel stayed at a distance, his presence reduced to scheduled emails and brief updates, filtered through process and boundaries. He no longer asked for understanding. He no longer tried to explain. Control had left him, and with it, the certainty he once wore so confidently. Noah noticed the difference before I did. "You smile more," he said one evening as we walked home from the park. "Do I?" I asked. He nodded. "You breathe different." I laughed softly, surprised by the truth of it. I wasn't richer. I wasn't rescued. I wasn't suddenly fearless. But I was steady. I paid my own bills. I made my own decisions. I trusted my instincts without asking permission. The life we were building wasn't impressive from the outside, but it was honest, and it was ours. Sometimes late at night, I thought back to the airport, to the woman I had been standing there, frozen between hope and fear. I wished I could tell her something. Not that everything would be easy, but that everything would be real again. And that was more than enough. I met Ethan Brooks without expectation. It was at a small community fundraiser held in a converted warehouse downtown, the kind of event with folding chairs, soft lighting, and people who came to listen rather than be seen. Noah was at a friend's house, and I had gone alone, more out of habit than hope. Ethan was speaking when I arrived. He stood at the front of the room, not commanding attention, just holding it. His voice was steady, unhurried. He spoke about rebuilding after loss, not in sweeping terms, but in practical ones, about learning how to show up again without pretending nothing had changed. I stayed longer than I planned. Afterward, people gathered in small clusters, exchanging polite compliments. I was pouring myself a second cup of coffee when he approached. "Thank you for coming," he said, as if he genuinely meant it. "You were good," I replied. "Honest." He smiled. "That's easier than impressive." We talked for a few minutes. About the neighborhood, about work, about nothing that mattered, and everything that did. He didn't ask why I was there alone. He didn't try to impress me with stories or credentials. He listened. When I mentioned Noah, his expression softened, not with pity, but understanding. "I have a daughter," he said. "She lives with her mom now." There was no bitterness in his voice, just fact. We exchanged numbers without ceremony. No promises. No expectations. Over the weeks that followed, our conversations stayed light. Coffee after work, short walks, shared silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward. He never rushed, never asked for more than I offered. One evening, as we sat on a bench watching the city lights come on, he said something that stayed with me. "I don't need to be important to you," he said. "I just want to be present." It was the opposite of everything I had known. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't compete with my past. He didn't offer rescue or certainty. And that was why I noticed myself relaxing around him in a way I hadn't in years. Ethan wasn't the reward at the end of survival. He was a possibility that appeared only after I had learned how to stand on my own. And for the first time, that felt like enough to consider more. We didn't rush it. That was the unspoken agreement between Ethan and me from the beginning. Time had already taught us what happened when people confused urgency with certainty. So we moved slowly, letting trust grow in the quiet spaces between conversations. Noah met Ethan months later, not as someone special, but as a friend who came by with coffee and stayed to help with homework. Ethan never tried to win him over. He never crossed boundaries or offered opinions that weren't asked for. He showed up consistently and let Noah decide what that meant. One evening, as we cleaned up dinner, Noah looked up and said, "He makes the house calmer." I smiled. Ethan said nothing. The proposal happened on an ordinary afternoon. We were walking through a small park near our apartment, leaves crunching under our feet. Ethan stopped near a bench, took a breath, and asked a question that didn't feel like a performance. "Would you like to build a life together?" he asked. "At your pace." There was no ring in his hand, no audience, just sincerity. I said yes. The wedding was small, a backyard borrowed from a friend. White chairs, simple flowers, nothing extravagant, nothing meant to impress. Noah walked beside me, holding the rings in a small wooden box he had chosen himself. When he handed them over, he whispered, "Mom looks happy." I was. Not the kind of happiness that dazzles or demands attention, the kind that settles into your bones and stays. Daniel wasn't there. He didn't need to be. He had become part of a chapter that no longer needed revisiting. As Ethan and I exchanged vows, there were no promises about forever being easy, only promises about honesty, patience, and showing up even when it was uncomfortable. Later, as the sun dipped low and people laughed softly around us, Noah ran up and wrapped his arms around both of us. "This feels right," he said simply. That was all the validation I needed. The life I had lost at the airport had once felt like everything. But standing there, barefoot on grass, surrounded by people who saw me clearly, I understood the truth. I hadn't been replaced. I had been redirected. And what I found on the other side wasn't revenge or victory. It was peace. I passed through the same airport again 2 years later. Different terminal, different season. Same polished floors reflecting overhead lights. The sound of rolling suitcases still echoed the way it always had, a familiar rhythm I once associated with endings. This time, Noah walked beside me, taller now, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Ethan was a few steps ahead, checking our gait, turning back every so often to make sure we were close. Not out of control, out of care. I stopped for a moment without realizing it. The memory rose uninvited. The exact spot where my life had split open, where hope had died, and something harder had taken its place. I remembered the weight in my chest, the way my hand had tightened around Noah's, the disbelief that had frozen my feet. Ethan noticed and came back. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded. "Yeah, just remembering." He didn't ask what. He didn't need to. Noah looked up at me. "This is where Daddy left," he said. Not accusing, not sad, just stating a fact. "Yes," I said. "It is." He thought about that, then shrugged. "I'm glad you didn't." So was I. We sat at the gate together, sharing snacks, watching planes lift into the sky. People around us were saying goodbyes, starting trips, returning home. Life in motion, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. I realized then that the airport had never been the villain in my story. Fear had been. Fear of being alone. Fear of losing stability. Fear of seeing the truth and not surviving it. I had survived it. Not by becoming stronger in the way people talk about strength, but by becoming clearer. By choosing honesty over comfort. By walking away when staying would have erased me. Daniel faded into the background of my life the way unresolved chapters sometimes do. Not forgiven. Not hated. Simply no longer central. His consequences had been fair, his role complete. What remained was what I had built. A family defined by presence, not performance. A marriage grounded in respect, not power. A child who had learned that truth, spoken gently, was still truth. As our boarding group was called, Ethan took my hand. Noah stepped between us, grinning as if this were just another adventure. And it was. I looked once more at the terminal behind us, then turned forward without hesitation. Some endings break you. Others free you. That day at the airport had been both, and walking away from it now, I understood the final truth of my story. I hadn't lost my life there. I had found it. As this story comes to a close, let's pause for a moment. Because if you're still here with us right now, something in this journey likely touched your heart in a quiet but real way. This wasn't just a story about betrayal or loss. It was a reminder that life doesn't break us in the moments we expect, but it often rebuilds us in ways we never planned. One of the core lessons here echoes the wisdom of Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The pain Elena faced was real, but what changed her life was not controlling others. It was choosing clarity, dignity, and truth over fear. Another Stoic idea reminds us that what stands in the way becomes the way. The airport, the betrayal, the loss, all of it became the path to healing, not the end of it. This story shows us that walking away is not failure, and starting again is not weakness. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is choose peace over familiarity. So if this story resonated with you, if it mirrored something you felt or lived through, know that you're not alone. Take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to our channel. Your presence here matters more than you know, and your healing journey is still unfolding. This story is a work of fiction created for storytelling and emotional reflection purposes only. While it is inspired by real-life experiences and common human struggles such as relationships, family conflict, and personal growth, all characters, events, and situations portrayed are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual people, places, or events is purely coincidental. The intention of this content is not to present factual claims, legal advice, or real-life accusations, but to explore emotional truths and life lessons through narrative storytelling. Viewers are encouraged to interpret the story as a dramatized scenario meant to inspire reflection, empathy, and personal insight, rather than as a representation of real individuals or situations. This content does not promote harm, misinformation, or defamation, and it is shared solely for entertainment, discussion, and emotional connection.